Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So if you have not yet had a major catastrophe occur while running your home lab, that probably just means that you haven't had a home lab for long enough yet. And I've decided to entitle today's presentation, Incus Server Exception. In a software program, an exception is referred to as an event that interrupts the normal execution flow of a program. So Incus servers are kept simple at the OS level to minimize failures and to more simply isolate faults. And that's not true just of Incus servers. In fact, I remember back when I used to run Windows servers when I was working, and the Windows servers that we ran, we found that they ran much better when they were purposed to run a particular single application. For example, we might have a Windows server that was designed specifically to run IIS. So 3 days ago, my infrastructure Incus server VMS Mist would not let me log in after a reboot, and that was just a little bit of a problem. So this occurred after an issue with one of my containers. And this error that I was getting was saying error mounting MQ to root FS. And it was giving me a permission denied. And so it turned out this occurred with Incus containers that had security.nesting equals to true. And that meant that they had Docker containers nested inside of those Incus containers, which I present frequently on the channel, and it's something that I do on the vast majority of my containers. So what exactly is MQ? Well, an MQ error is a POSIX message queue error, and it's a means for interprocess communication via a kernel service, otherwise known as how it talks to each other, or how things talk to each other. So after rebooting VMS Mist, I discovered that I couldn't log in via SSH, and then even when I logged in from the console, I could not issue sudo commands. And so I would do a sudo, here's an example with a sudo se, and it would say that it was unable to allocate pty, invalid argument. And so what exactly is a PTY? Well, in Linux, a PTY is a software emulation of a physical terminal. And PTYs are used with commands like SSH, sudo, and the GNOME terminal, amongst others. And I'm sure there's more, but that's just what I found when I was having problems. And so the dev PTS mounted file system provides PTY devices. And here's an example where I did a mount and I grepped /dev/PTS, and here you can see dev PTS mounted. However, the thing of concern is that over here it says that PTX mode is equal to 000. More on that later. So then I did an ls-l on /dev/ptmx, which is its mount point. And the thing of concern that I see here is that although the mount point is listed, it's supposed to have a symbolic link associated with it, and it was not there. So how should it look? Well, in modern Linux, dev PTS is mounted very early in the boot process by systemd. And in older Linux systems, when dev PTS was mounted, it was mounted in /etc/fstab. So dev PTS should have a ptmx mode equal to 666 and not 000. And for those of you that understand Linux permissions of user, group, and other, you'll understand that 000 means that nobody has any access. So the /dev/ptmx mount point should be a symbolic link, and that was the second problem. So here's an example of how it should look when I did the mount of the grep on dev/PTS. You can see here that the PTX mode is 666, and this is after I had fixed it. And then down here, you can see when I look at the mount point /dev/PTMX, it has an arrow pointing to the right and providing a symbolic link. And that's how it should look. So why exactly did this occur? Well, that's really a good question. I'm not really entirely sure, and I did an awful lot of research. And in fact, I rebuilt my system from scratch 5 times, and I imported my Incus containers from backup. And so this is time for a commercial here. I have several videos out there that show how to do Incus exports in order to create backups, or how you can use Lex Console to perform backups as well. And that is critically important because you never know when an event like this may occur. And I also want to tell you that I didn't go out and rebuild my system first. I tried several other alternatives. Since I couldn't really log in and perform any commands directly, and in fact I did not have a root password, which was something else I corrected, I went ahead and provided a root password for the eventuality where sudo might break. And so then, unfortunately, I had to be able to connect to the console, and fortunately, I did so with my Jet KVM, which I presented in another video, and that made things really convenient. But even doing that, there wasn't much I could do, and so I had to turn around and boot via a live CD, and then from the live CD, I went ahead and cherooted over to the disk and was able to make several changes as tests, but they all ended up pretty much in dead ends, and I didn't get anywhere. So there is some belief that this type of error can occur on Incus servers who have Ubuntu Pro enabled. And so I believe that on my VMS Mist system, which is kind of my main infrastructure system, and it has the most exposure to the internet with the connection that I have with reverse proxy and NPM, that I decided to run Ubuntu Pro there. And so Ubuntu Pro, they provide you 5 free licenses that you can run in your home lab, and it provides 10-year expanded security maintenance. It's not really the 10 years that's important here. The thing that's important is you get expanded security patches that a normal sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade do not provide. And it applies those patches in a real-time basis. So that way any early day exploits will be covered. So I developed a Band-Aid fix that is a service that runs after Incus starts and during the boot up process that remounts dev PTS correctly and restores the symbolic link to the mount point. And the reason I did that was because even though I had installed everything from scratch 5 times, that means completely rebuilding the operating system and installing Incus, I couldn't get around that. And more about that later, because I actually think I figured out what was going on. And so now when my Incus server boots, it has no issues. So I was running Incus 6.0 LTS, and I really didn't realize that. I discovered that somehow, even after multiple rebuilds, I was running Incus 6.0 LTS, which was released over a year ago in April of 2024. And so if you followed my video entitled Incus Container Step by Step, then you installed your Incus server from the Zabbly repositories, and I didn't do anything any different. So apparently I had been upgrading my Incus all the way to the current Incus as of this month, August of 2025, and I was running the latest version 6.15, or at least I was installing it. And so eventually when I fixed the problem, I could do an Incus space dash dash version and see that I was running 6.15. And by the way, I have 9 Incus servers, and this single Incus server, VMS Mist, was the only one that was running 6.0 LTS. That being said, every time I did a sudo nala update followed by a sudo nala upgrade, I could see clearly that I was pulling the latest version and that 6.15 was installed. However, the Incus version was showing 6.0 LTS. So I was updating Incus from Zabbly, which is what I realized. But just like in Firefox, and I had an earlier video about customizing an Ubuntu desktop, where I pointed out that you could have an instance of Ubuntu, and in later instances of Ubuntu 2404 specifically, the snap overrides the apt package for Firefox. And Canonical's Incus 6.0 LTS was overriding Zabbly's Incus 6.15, and I fixed that, and I believe that was as the result of running ESM, or the expanded security maintenance that I mentioned on the previous slide. So here's a command that you can use to look at your system and determine a given package what is actually running. You can do an apt-cache and then policy and then the name of the program. So in this case, I'm looking at Incus. This is after it was fixed, but when I performed this command before it was fixed, and I wish I had gotten the screenshot, it indicated that I had Incus version 6.15 installed. However, the currently executing version was this one you see down here, which is 6.0.0, and it as a result of various ESM patches. So that was a bad thing, and that was what I fixed, and that's what we're going to show you how to fix if you're running ESM, or even if something else happens to override a package on your system. So we want to provide Zabbly Incus a higher priority, basically. You can create what's called a policy file, and that policy file will prefer the Zabbly Incus as opposed to the canonical Incus. And so I do a sudo nano /etc/apt/preferences.d, and in this case the name of the package is Incus, so that's the name of the file. And then I insert the following code into that file, and it's very simple. It identifies the packages, which are Incus, Incus Client, and Incus Common. And I say the origin is packages.zabbly.com. And then I set what's called a pin priority. This is referred to as pinning an application repository to a priority higher than the priority that is used by default, which I believe is 500. And then what I do is a sudo apt update, which will make this take effect. And after that, I do a sudo apt install Incus. Now, wait a minute. You're saying Incus is already installed. Why would I do a sudo apt install Incus? And that's what's required to actually reset the pointers. It doesn't change anything. Okay. And then the next issue was, how do I fix the dev PTS issue? Because after all, as long as that issue existed, I was completely incapable of logging in via SSH or using sudo from my user account. So I did a sudo nano /usr/local/sbin, and I created a shell script by the name of fix-ptmx. And then I put the following commands in it, which are really straightforward. One of them is to do a remount on that dev/pts, but this time with ptx-mx mode equals 666 as opposed to 000. And then the last command here is where I am resetting the symbolic link correctly. And then I do a chmod on that file to give it execute permission in order to be able to execute it. And then this provides that script that's going to be needed to fix the dev PTS mount and restore the missing symbolic link. So how do we run this and when? And that's what took me a tremendously long period of time, because I wasn't sure if it needed to run immediately at boot or after everything was booted, or exactly what to do with this. And so I created a one-time at boot service. And so I did a sudo nano /etc/systemd/system fix-ptmx.service. And so that went ahead and created what we call a unit service file. And so this service file is pretty straightforward. It just says that it's supposed to fix the symlink. I have a comment here, and it's supposed to fix the PTMX mode. But I say specifically, this executes after LXD starts. You're going to go, wait a minute, LXD? Well, LXD is actually LXC. It's parts of LXC. Linux containers. That's the underlying infrastructure for Incus. So I say, make sure that LXD started, make sure that Incus is started, and make sure that SSH are started. And then these wants are basically, these are the services, again, that we want to make sure that you're tracking. And this is called a one-shot service, and we're executing the script that we created on the previous page, and that's basically it. All right, so then we need to run the service. Well, anytime you create a new service in the service directory, you have to go ahead and reload the system service files because systemd requires that. And we do that with the sudo systemctl daemon-reload. And then I enable the service to run at boot time. And I do that with the sudo systemctl enable fix-ptmx.service. And then you can start the service on the running system, although in this particular case, we don't really need to do this because the service really only runs at boot time. And we would do that, if you're interested, at sudo systemctl start fix-ptmx.service. So at this point, when you reboot, dev PTS would be remounted, and the symbolic link will be restored after Incus is fully up. When I had tried to run this on previous times, I was unsuccessful because something kept resetting it. And I hadn't really figured out what the something that is resetting it is exactly. So in summary, I still do not understand what caused the dev PTS issue. And I disabled the service after correcting the problem with the Ubuntu Incus 6.0 LTS having priority, and when I rebooted the system, the unable to allocate PTY error was back once again. And so if you run expanded security maintenance like I do, be sure to set the priority for the Zabbly Incus packages because ESM overrides Incus. And it may be that if I had reinstalled from scratch like I did 5 times and initially set the package priority before installing Incus, then it would have installed Incus version 6.15 from Zabbly out of the box, and I might never have seen the error or issue with dev PTS. So the moral of this story is basically leave no stone unturned and look at every problem step by step to try to figure out what's going on. If you haven't had a major problem occur yet in your home lab, you probably will, and cooler heads prevail to solve problems. So anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.